Ladies and gentlemen, members of City Council, please attend the call meeting of the City Council to be held in the 6th floor conference room, 801 Crawford Street, 6 p.m., Monday, August 25th, 2014, for the purpose of a public work session. In addition, you may consider a motion to go into closed meeting by order of the mayor. Mr. Cherry?
Here.
Mr. Evans?
Here.
Mr. Meeks?
Here.
Mr. Moody?
Here.
Ms. Simmons? Here. Ms. Randall? Here. Mayor Wright?
Here. Thank you. Well, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right. Well, it's always great to see our constitutional officers all at once, and we're pleased to have you here. And actually, you requested this meeting, so I guess I would kick it off. Who's the spokesperson, or who wants to start? Ms. Morrison? Okay, we'll start. Good afternoon, Ms. Morrison.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wright and members of the City Council and the staff. I would like to take this, and our citizens that are here with us tonight also. I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you to City Council on behalf of all of the constitutional officers and their staffs. We had a concern about our pay treatment for our staffs and ourselves for the upcoming year. As you know, the Virginia General Assembly eliminated from the budget amendment, the Appropriation Act, the 3% increase for constitutional officers and their staff. And we approached council and the city manager's staff about considering doing something for our staffs and ourselves. And we have in front of us the authorization that the city council and staff have put together. And we just wanted to personally come out tonight and say thank you for hearing our concerns and thank you for rectifying it.
Okay, very good. Anybody else want to speak? All right, we just want to say, and I think you've heard from all of us together that we really appreciate everything that your officers do here. I know that it's always a back and forth of what do you do for the Commonwealth, what do you do for the city of Portsmouth. It's what do you do for the people. And what you do is a variable impact on our city, and we couldn't function without your officers and the people that you employ every day to do great jobs, so we're pleased to hear that. I'm glad we could accommodate. I guess we could not do the 3% raise, but the bonus, I think we all agree, was a good gesture, and hopefully going forward we can have some dialogue, hopefully by next year this time, and maybe look at doing something on a more permanent basis. I think I shared with the manager and some of the others that it was a great concern to us, and I talked to some of the other cities and towns, and they have MOUs with their constitutional officers to include them along with the city employees, but there's some give and take in there. And so I'd like for us to be able to, Mr. Manager, if we could in the upcoming year, have that dialogue and see if we can't come to some understanding and a memorandum of understanding so we won't get into this predicament in the future. Any other council members like to say anything? Okay.
I'd just like to second what you said, Mayor. Their employees get paid by the city. On their pay is on a city paycheck, and hopefully, and we've been down this road before, so hopefully next budget cycle the manager will give us something that we can avoid this type of thing and consternation by your employees where they're included like they are as city employees. So.
Okay, very good. Thank y'all. And Mr. Manager, thank you for your hard work and your staff. Yep. Thank y'all. Y'all have a good day.
Thank you.
And we will take this action tomorrow at council meeting. Is that right?
Sir? Yes,
We will take this action tomorrow on the council meeting. Thank you.
Yes, with accommodation. Yes.
Frankie.
They've got a super job. I don't know how you
Okay,
could
Madam
ignore
Clerk.
them.
I'll turn it over to the city manager for your next item.
Okay. Mr. Roy?
I hope so. We'll be in touch.
We'll let them.
Love it, sweetheart. Carry on. Y'all done a super job. Hang on in there.
Yes, sir.
Oh, somebody's eyeglass case, so maybe Jimmy's. Jimmy.
Hang on in there. They've done a good job. Oh, how they do stuff like that.
The next item deals with a proposed amendment to the city's zoning ordinance to allow for certain uses in what you and I would refer to as a heavy manufacturing zone. And this came about because of the pure PER properties that's located here in yellow. This is the Jordan Bridge. Okay, this is the Elizabeth River. And north of the site here is the Norfolk Naval Shipyard. This property was owned by the Portsmouth Port and Industrial Commission, PPIC. It was conveyed to the owner of PER to do a granary. It was conveyed with certain deed restrictions. One of the deed restrictions was that a concrete plant was allowed on the site during the construction of the site, because there's a lot of concrete work to take place on this site. However, once the site was built out, then the concrete plant had to come down. After the property was transferred and construction went underway, the owner of this business ended up in a situation where he could partner with another entity to permanently manufacture concrete on that site. In order to do that, the deed restriction had to be released by PPIC. PPIC considered that, thought it was a very good use, and because they consider you to be their economic development partner, they came and asked you, what do you think? And at that time, there was concern about the fact that reused concrete would be crushed on that site to be recycled, second, so to speak. Take a drain pipe that doesn't quite meet specifications, so you crush it and then recycle it. And it was based on that concern about vibration, the noise, and the air pollution that you said, let's let the deed restriction last. Since then, there has been discussion about revisiting this matter, and that's why it's before you. At the very least, we need to change the zoning ordinance, because the way the zoning ordinance is written now, it hampers our economic development in what is clearly an industrial site like this. There are two challenges. One is that this site is not served by an arterial road. Even though Route 337 Elm Avenue runs by this property, it's not served per se by a major road that would give it egress and ingress for heavy trucks. So
What, you got to go around the back way there, like
it's got
toward the Navy Yard, that back road, you've got to turn.
Here. You turn here, and this
Right.
is the property that's owned by Dwight Dixon.
Right.
And you go
Behind
north
that, right.
and then come to the site this way. The other issue is the issue of whether or not it's a permitted use. And so what's before you is an amendment to the zoning ordinance that would allow for this type of use in these situations by a conditional use permit. And I recommend that you start the process that we amend the zoning ordinance for this. Now, let's assume, and remember the process, it will go to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission will hold a public hearing on the matter, go through that process, and then make a recommendation to council. Then it comes to you, you have a public hearing, and then you consider the recommendation of the Planning Commission and what you hear at the public hearing. And if you amend the zoning ordinance, then the property owner can apply for a conditional use permit. And so my recommendation tonight is start the process so that you amend the code, because right now the code doesn't help us from an economic development sense. It's too early to comment on the conditional use permit for two reasons. First, the code's not been amended yet. Second, let's assume that it was amended. You don't have a conditional use permit. And typically, when you get a conditional use permit application, the applicant will propose a series of conditions. So I don't know what those conditions might be. I have recommended to the owner of the property that they discuss this with the Navy Yard, and they have made contact to set up a meeting to have that discussion. That meeting has yet to take place. And I'd like to, Bob, if you would come up and talk about the technicalities of this amendment.
Okay.
Did I cause damage to this?
No, you're fine. You're good.
Okay.
Good evening, Mayor Wright, members of council. Just like I think really what I'd like to do is clarify any misconceptions there might be regarding how the zoning deals with this property, because I've heard a lot of different people make a lot of different statements that aren't technically correct as far as the zoning is concerned. And as John was saying, within our zoning ordinance there are use standards that go with almost every type of use that's in the zoning code. And in the case of heavy industrial, which a concrete plant would be heavy industrial, and it's not the only heavy industrial use, but it's one. There's a series of standards that they must comply with, and as I think you're aware of those, I'll just kind of go through them quickly. There's a 500-foot separation from residential districts, schools or daycare centers, so that's a performance standard. There's a requirement that the use be screened, which is fairly standard. There's a requirement that they have a properly functioning on-site transportation system. There's a requirement that they have direct access onto an arterial or major collector. And I think, as John was pointing out, that's probably one of the more restrictive pieces. For example, within an industrial park, you might have an industrial parcel that's, sited onto an internal street. It's not an arterial, but it might be a perfect location for these kind of uses. So that's a very restrictive kind of a condition. So that's the first part of that. So that would be to modify the zoning code to basically say those standards still apply unless council grants a use permit. So that would basically say we're still going to keep the standards in place. However, council can site by site make determinations whether certain locations would be appropriate for modifying the standards in the code. The second piece is one I think is important. It's in our definition of heavy manufacturing. Again, this concrete plant is in there. And in our definition of heavy manufacturing, the last statement in there, and I'll just read it to you, says, specifically prohibited are rendering, petroleum refining, asphalt or concrete plants, and manufacture of chemicals, fertilizers, paint, and turpentine. So a lot of the more, I'll call them hazardous or more intensive industrial uses are specifically prohibited. And that's the point of the zoning code I think has been lost in a lot of this conversation. But our definition specifically prohibits the use. So this code amendment that would be before you would strike out the prohibition against a concrete plant.
Yeah. Danny?
When this first came up, I kind of talked to the council about it, and then we went out to a site. I actually took a page, and then I asked John to come out there. It's a concrete plant directly across the street, right there, and the silos are probably within 75 feet or 100 feet of the interstate. And when we talked, I did not know that, but I went out there and went on the site, and that he raised it up probably 6 to 8 feet of crushed concrete. One concern is, how did the neighborhood get it if it's not allowed? Is it pre-existing before code change?
Exactly, pre-existing.
And then when we were talking, I said, the use permit would give us a seat at the table to decide what he can and can't do, and if he didn't follow the standards we put, we could yank his use permit,
or he could force compliance.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if we go through all these steps with his use permit and he prevails, or he still doesn't have egress or egress.
Well, that would be allowed by the conditional use permit.
Right.
All right. Even let's say we say, you know what, we're not going to give them a use permit, and then what is the property good for?
Well, that was the point that Bob made, because you could have an industrial park that's got an internal street that's not an arterial street, and it's a perfect spot for heavy industrial.
Right.
And so that's why this amendment is really important. Then you look at these things on a case-by-case basis. Where it makes sense, you do it. Where the conditions make sense, you do it.
Right.
And just to sort of
Elizabeth?
clarify, you could do like a lower intensity industrial use out there, but it's the ones we classify as a more of a heavy industrial use, which the site at one, would be considered for that.
Why would concrete and be put in the same as turpentine and all? I mean, it's just classification.
Well, it just depends on the process being used out there. If you're, again, there's going to be heavy vehicles, potentially. You've got materials moving back and forth on the road, so it looks, one of the reasons it gets in these questions about, impact on the adjacent streets for, say, moving cement mixers or other delivery vehicles through there. As John mentioned, whether there's going to be a noise issue or a dust issue. And at this point, as not having an application, we don't know whether any of those are issues or not, but the code assumes it's a potential issue there. And the way the code is currently structured, it says, since that might be an issue, we're just going to make it a non-issue by prohibiting the use, as opposed to giving you the opportunity to look at it on a case-by-case basis.
And there are all sorts of ways to do that. You could do it by hours of operation. You could do it by screening. You could do it by a sound wall. But we need to be in a situation where the owner of the property can consider what alternative that works best.
And by having a use permit, we have a seat at the table to determine
Yes,
what
sir.
it does.
And then if the use permit is granted and the conditions are not followed, you can then take the appropriate sanction.
Elizabeth?
Okay, I'm gonna make this worse instead of better. Now, I'm not the planning director, I'm not a lawyer. But if I took this out of our current zoning off of the internet today. So I'm going to read again the sentence you just read, which is the definition of heavy manufacturing. And the last line says, specifically prohibited are rendering, petroleum, refining, asphalt, concrete plants, and the manufacture of chemicals, fertilizers, paint, and turpentine. Two sections above that, under examples of heavy manufacturing, which are permitted by right by this same code, it says, examples use types of heavy manufacturing include, but are not limited to, the manufacture or assembly of machinery, equipment, instruments, vehicles, appliances, rendering, concrete production, asphalt plants, glass and plastic production, cardboard fabrication, and petroleum refining. So is it in or is it out?
Well, I can help you with that as if we weren't aware of that. Specifically what the code is doing is giving you a list of things. That's examples of things. Okay, so the first part, that part you just read there.
Yeah, definitions.
No, not the definitions piece. The one you were just reading
Okay.
about the examples of these are. Those are, in fact, examples. But the code itself, by definition, excludes them. I'm not saying it's good structure. I'm just telling you, those are examples of those kind of uses. And then the ordinance specifically says they're prohibited. So
Let's fix this.
That's our recommendation.
I think Ms. Randy, you can go next. I don't have a problem with moving forward with that. My concern is with this owner and others, when they come and pitch that here's what I want to do, we go through that whole process, and then midstream they want to change, and then we what is going on that this guy, has he got his business up and running yet? Has he done what he even came to us 2 years ago, and what we actually granted him? What was he originally supposed to have been doing?
He's still doing construction on the site. He's still getting the site ready.
For what? What was his original purpose for coming to
A granary, a grain operation.
A grain operation. He's
Right.
going to take grain and ship it
That's
somewhere, right?
Right.
Okay, and so now we've gone from grain to crushing concrete.
Well, concrete
or
plant.
concrete plant.
Concrete
Settling.
plant.
When I went out there and talked to him, what he was like, Blue Circle, they sell the cement. What he wants to do is bring the cement in and make his own concrete, and have the silos there to hold the concrete. So it's kind of he's still using it as a port, but since the material's there, he's going to get it cheap. He can, have another revenue.
So we out of the grain business now?
No. He
So then
said
he wants to do both.
he wants to do both. But looking just with my knowledge of, he had to spend close to $1 million to $1.4 million with just elevating the property up, and just improving it by he's brought the property up for probably 5 to 6 foot of crushed concrete.
What's your point?
Now I'm saying he is spending money to improve the property. It's not like he's set by what I've seen. So
Okay, Ms. Randall?
My concern is environmental, because they are still within the range of pollution of residents that live around near the area. And the wind is going to still blow.
And that's a very good point.
And I'm very much concerned about it. I've watched that happen with the old Smith Douglas plants and all those plants they built over in those areas, and it's had a side effect on even the sea, the creatures that are coming out of the water and everything out from the pollutions and pollutants have gone in. I want to make sure that we're ensuring that the citizens are safe first of all.
That's a very good point.
That is the thing I'm concerned about, and I've lived long enough to hear these presentations and see where it comes out saying one thing, and in the end, 10 or 15 years down the road, we find out that there are side effects and pollutants, and people are having problems with it. And that's my concern. I think we need to make sure that is clear. I'm familiar with the area, and I know about the waterway, south, north, and all of that section on back over in there. And I just want to make sure that we think in terms of what's best for the welfare and the health of the citizens who are going to be impacted come what way, whether it's the water, the air pollutants, or whatever. And many toxins have been shuttled up and down through that waterway. I'm young enough to know it.
Yes, ma'am. And that's a very good point, and that's why the conditional use permit's a good way to handle that, because you can really articulate your concerns in that process.
I echo my colleagues' concerns about the environment. I think before we rush into it, we do need to take that into consideration. A lot of money's been put into federal money into cleaning up the river, and concrete is as high in alkalinity, which would not be good for the river. Also, the dust, as Ms. Randall mentioned, is another factor. If those concerns can be addressed, I'm okay with it. That property hadn't generated any money in years. It's been sitting vacant until this company came along for as long as anybody can remember. But I guess my question is, will DEQ have any say-so in the way that's handled? And also, since we already have a concrete plant there, have there been any complaints, any environmental problems associated with that plant?
Let me answer those questions this way. DEQ would not be concerned about the use here. I mean, that's in your zoning ordinance. I'm not aware of any complaints that DEQ has gotten from that site. Your environmental concerns are good, and that you can address those in the conditional use permit process. Amending the code is step one. Step two is once the code is amended, then you have the application for a conditional use permit. Then you get a chance to weigh the proposal against your concerns against the concerns for the environment.
Ms. Meeks?
one DEQ is going to require an air permit.
Oh yeah,
All right.
I was thinking more of this.
Right. If you go down the river probably a half a mile where the old Alcoa plant is, they're taking in cement right there. I mean, and it's one dome is the size of that whole property. So, and they got 2 domes. When me and John was out there, we did see that Wheelabrator has, where the 2 water pieces are.
Yeah.
They have constructed, without our knowing, as far as I know, an outside with the flash, and it's just up in the air. And
What it is, it's a conveyor belt that leaves the plant. The plant's located about right here. And it looks like ash coming down the conveyor belt, but it's actually the renderings of non-ferrous metal.
Yep.
It comes down the conveyor belt to a man-made trough that is two concrete walls, and there's visualize a front-end loader that comes in and scoops the stuff up. And when it scoops the stuff up, you have a cloud of gray smoke.
Right.
It looks like
That's
smoke.
right.
And then it dumps it on another conveyor belt that shoots it into a container.
Yep.
And then once the container is full, it's shipped off to someplace that processes non-ferrous metal.
Right.
And so there's a great amount of contaminants that get in the air in that
Right there.
process.
Shouldn't we be concerned about that?
Yes.
Well, we should be concerned about it.
Are we approaching them about that operation? And
But they get looked at really hard because of the business that they in by DEQ.
Permits weren't required.
I don't know. We'll check that out.
That's what we need to check into.
that's what
Yeah.
that's what I'm getting at. I mean, go ahead, Paige.
Thank you, Mayor. As Danny said, we did visit the site and we discussed many of the concerns we're talking about tonight. I suggest we go on and fix our ordinance. As he talked about, they can offer profits. Well, we can also put conditions on the use permit. So we can list out anything we want to make sure is addressed. We make it as a condition of the use permit when we approve the permit, and then as those conditions aren't met, we can deal with them. But we need to fix this ordinance because, as Elizabeth just read, it is totally contradictory and confusing. So at a minimum, whether we ever get them use permit or not, we need to move on. We need to move on with fixing this ordinance.
Is that a consensus?
Yep.
I agree. I
We
think
got it?
Thank you.
We'll put this in.
Next item.
Next item is we have a need for a well. First, let me ask you this: assuming assuming that the Planning Commission hears this, would you be willing to do like you did on the last amendment to the code? Schedule your public hearing.
So it aligns with
Yes,
that.
sir.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Lines of
And John,
communication.
you've heard most of the concerns, so if they are included in the Planning Commission's
Yeah.
conditions, then we need to, when it comes to us,
Right.
prepare to.
All these crazy zoning things we need to correct as quickly as possible for Watson.
Yeah, because some of this
Yes,
stuff, we shouldn't be going through this
that's right.
now. We should.
Right.
My concern again is if we are allowing people to come in and take advantage of
Our environment.
the environment, our weakness and how we approach things, and we want to be business friendly, but we don't want to give this nice piece of prime real estate for shipping grain and all of that sail through, and we all agreed, and now we're midstream and we want to crush concrete, and because our ordinances and the other things don't align itself, we get that wrapped around the fact that this business came to us with one proposal and now we're doing something else, and now we're here to Willebrate us doing something else that they haven't brought. We've got to make sure we keep controls on that and we don't bash our languages because they are confusing. We just need to fix them, but that still doesn't mean that we need to make sure that we're being unruly to these developers and business folks who want to do business, but we need to make sure we're also not allowing somebody to come in here and do something totally counter. And we don't need the Craddock community, we don't need the Navy Yard or any of those other folks in there, so we need to do an impact analysis and we need to make sure we're clear. I'm concerned about getting access to that because I went out there 2 years ago and met him when he first wanted to do that, and just driving my vehicle back there, getting to him around Dixon's property was a challenge. So I can't imagine heavy trucks and all of that going around there. But again, it's prime real estate, it's right on the water, and I'm just concerned that we were led to believe one thing and now we're trying to switch horses. And anyway, all right, next item.
We need a closed meeting.
I move to go into a closed meeting pursuant to the provisions of Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711 for the following purposes. Discussion concerning the acquisition of real property for a public purpose and the disposition of publicly held property in the downtown and Burton's Point areas of the city where discussion in open meeting would adversely affect the city's bargaining position as permitted under subsection A3. Consultation with legal counsel and briefing by staff concerning legal matters involving the South Norfolk Jordan Bridge and a contract with the Southeastern Public Service Authority as permitted under subsection A7. Consultation with legal counsel and briefings by staff pertaining to a matter of actual litigation, Transportation District Commission versus City of Portsmouth as permitted under subsection A7, and consideration of candidates for appointment to city boards and commissions as permitted under subsection A1.
Second.
Mr. Cherry?
Yes.
Mr. Edmonds?
Yes.
Mr. Meeks?
Yes.
Mr. Moody?
Yes.
Ms. Simmons?
Yes.
Ms. Randall?
Yes.
Mayor Wright?
Yes.
We are in closed. Thank you.
Thank you.